Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We're going to continue our 10-year study here through Ecclesiastes. I think it was actually a year ago, if I remember right, almost a year ago, at least in September, I believe, when I first started this. So we're getting there. We're getting through it. We're in chapter 3, moving to chapter 4 tonight. In our last message in this series, not too long ago, I think, we learned that it is there is a time, a season for everything under the sun. We read that familiar poem there that is well known in the book of Ecclesiastes there in the beginning of chapter 3. And we took great hope at the prospect we found in chapter 3, verse 11 in particular, that regardless of the season of life, he, talking about God there, was made or has made everything beautiful in his time. Very similar to the promise that we find in Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. So regardless of our circumstances that we find ourselves in during this life, we can take comfort in the fact that God is working every circumstance, everything good or bad seemingly in our lives for good or to be beautiful. So today we continue our study here in Ecclesiastes, picking up where we left off in verse 16. Now I need to give you a fair warning again. In our last study, we kind of finished on a high note, okay? Looking at what God has done, making everything beautiful, focusing on the sovereign hand of God's working. But for those of you using a study Bible right now, you might notice that if you have an outline, depending on what your outline may or may not say, it probably says something like this at the beginning of verse 16 in chapter 3. It has a heading that might say something like Solomon's Second Discourse of Vanities, okay? So that tips you off right there that we're kind of dipping back down now, okay? We're diving back into what Solomon is doing, again, examining more vanities or empty things of life that don't make sense to him. So get ready, all right, buckle up here. This is actually, when I was reading through this, the first time I read it, I just kind of sat back and thought, this is depressing. This is rough. I mean, he's laying it all out there. But there is some encouragement that I think we can find here as we read through it. So I don't want you to get too discouraged off the bat. There is some good stuff that Solomon is trying to teach us in this study. Most of you are probably aware of the two most highly talked about current events going on in our country and the world right now. The death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, one of them. So much is still unknown or is yet to be revealed, and everyone seems to develop a bias or opinion on the topic. I'm not here to decide what is not right or wrong about that, but it's a topic of conflict that's going on right now. There's also the rising terror group known as ISIS, terrorizing the Middle East, killing or imprisoning anyone that does not claim the same faith as them. In the midst of both of these conflicts, we hear three words being yelled out over the radio, news stations, on signs in the streets. Three words being, we want what? We want justice. We want justice. The title of my message this evening is, But That's Not Fair. The subtitle there is The Believer's Response to Injustice. That's not fair. The believer's response to injustice. I want you to follow along as I read here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 16. We'll read to chapter 4, verse 3. Solomon says, "And moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and every work. I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts. Even one thing befalleth them, as one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence over a beast, for all is vanity. All go unto one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should sorrow or should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead which are already dead more than the living which are yet alive. Yea, better is he that both they which have not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and into chapter 4, Solomon cries out for one thing. He cries out for justice. Yet his cry seems to fall on deaf ears here. So he concludes that life is harsh, and then you die. There's an encouragement. But in this passage, I think we're going to actually find some meaning, some motivation for our lives in the midst of what he's trying to say here. And so as we look through these verses, we're going to see three things that Solomon shares with us that I think will help us cope with or deal with the injustice, the oppression that we find in this world around us and personally in our lives right now. Look down at verse 16 again. He says, and moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. The word furthermore, or moreover there, connects this passage with chapter 3, verses 1 through 15, which is what we talked about last time, where Solomon stated the good timing, or God's timing is good in everything. That word also marks a change in emphasis. So now Solomon is going to air a few of his issues, his problems with the world that he sees. We have Solomon's observations here, and they're kind of discouraging, we notice, right? So Solomon looks around, and you can almost sense the sarcasm here as he describes what he sees. It's as if he walks out and he tries to find meaning in life, meaning somewhere, any kind of meaning in life. And he stumbles upon what he calls the place of judgment, which is what? Be the court of law, okay? So he stumbles onto the place of judgment, the court of law, and it's as if he arrives at the court and says, finally. If there's any sanity, if there's any good thing, if there's any justice to be found here, certainly it's in the judicial court system, right? And then he observes for a while, only to find out that the judicial system is corrupt. That's a shocker, right? The judicial system is corrupt. And so he furthers his thought there, that it seems that in the very place that righteousness should prevail in this world, wickedness is instead reigning. You ever find yourself frustrated with the injustice around you? Yes, we're quick to notice the injustice that we see in the court system. We're quick to think of all the injustices that we experience as believers, that good, upstanding citizens of America seem to experience every day. We're quick to talk about the injustice carried out against companies like Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A and other conservative Christian companies and organizations. And we wonder, like Solomon, why is injustice and wickedness prevailing in this world around us? Sometimes it's more over, simple matters, not necessarily the big stuff, not necessarily the world problems. What about personally in your own lives? We see injustice all around us, don't we? We experience it all the time, don't we? We see an obvious sinner, a vile person, enjoying the richest blessings in life while we suffer. That's not fair. That's not right. Wouldn't it be nice if every time someone cut you off in traffic, you would be assured to watch them get in an accident 5 minutes later? That'd be awesome. Think about it. Just think if justice was just default, carried out against every wrong that was ever carried. So someone cuts you off in traffic, and you think, that's really frustrating, but, they're going to get in an accident in 5 minutes for sure, so you know what? It's okay. That's all right. It'd be nice if that was the way life worked, right? What about the dishonest salesperson who cheats you on a service or a product? It'd be nice if you could be assured that he would just, go home and find his home burnt down or something like that, So you better not treat me wrong. You know how the rules go. You cheat me, your house burns down, It's usually a good argument. You imagine how much justice would happen in this world if that was the case. Why doesn't that happen? Why don't we see justice happening more often? I remember when I was a kid, we were traveling somewhere in Tennessee. It was probably on Route 40 or something. I was pretty young. I'm surprised how much I remember about this, but it was a good experience, I guess. And but we're traveling on Route 40, and I think I'm in the back seat. We got our minivan going, and they had construction going on, so we were shut down to one lane. And it was pretty empty, but this one car came up, right on our tail and just started tailgating us for miles, and there's nothing you could do about it. We weren't, going too slow, but my dad wasn't going to speed. And so this guy you could tell, was just furious with us. He had some place to be, apparently, and he wasn't going to get off our tail. So for a while, he just rode our tail. And eventually, the one lane finally broke into two lanes again, and so we got over, and this guy just took off. And he waved his fist or something else at us when we went by. And then he was gone. And about a minute, you couldn't even see him anymore. And about 5 minutes later, no joke, 5, maybe 10 minutes later, we see blue lights up in front of us. And we get up closer, and there we see the guy. He just got pulled over, literally 5 minutes later. That felt good. That felt so good. And we just kind of slowed down and waved at him as we drove by, That felt good. And I remember how happy my dad was, at this. I wish that happened all the time. And if that was the way life worked, wouldn't it be so much better? Wouldn't it be easier if justice like that would just automatically happen to anyone that wronged anyone else? Yeah, it sure would. The reality is, though, what? That's not the case. We live in an unjust world. More often than not, those that are in the wrong don't receive the punishment that they deserve, and many times the righteous, the ones trying to do the right thing, are the ones that actually suffer in this world. That's frustrating. Solomon understands this truth, and the first thing we see here is the reality of injustice in this world. He understood this truth thousands of years ago, and the fact is nothing has changed today. But within this discourse here, we see a response to the injustice in this world. And within this, Solomon, I think, kind of weaves in a couple key points that we want to try to pull out of this passage right here. So we see that injustice does exist. And while wickedness seems to be on the rise and injustice seems to be served everywhere we look, there's a truth that Solomon tries to bring out here in verse 17. Solomon says, and you look down with me, verse 17, he says, I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. So Solomon here, he affirmed that God will judge both the righteous and the wicked for their works. But this judgment comes in his time, not ours. The time of this judgment is kind of ambiguous. It's in the future sometime. That's all we know. Sometimes he judges people in this life, sometimes he does not. But payday is coming someday. We can be assured of that. Over in Psalm 37, 12 through 17, for sake of time, you know to turn there. I'll read it for you. It says, the wicked plotteth against the just, and gnasheth upon him and his teeth. And I like this right here. And the Lord shall laugh at him, for he seeth his day is coming. The wicked have drawn out the sword and have bent their bow to cast down the poor and needy and to slay such as be of an upright conversation. Their sword shall enter into their own heart, and their bows shall be broken. A little that a righteous man hath is better than the riches of many wicked. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholdeth the righteous. That's an awesome encouragement. That's an awesome promise that we have. And that's the promise that I think Solomon understands and is kind of referring to right here. That yes, injustice does happen, but we can trust that God one day will make the wrongs of this world right. And that may be an encouragement to hear, and I hope it is to you. But at the same time, you might be thinking, perhaps from experience, you might think, Pastor Josh, that's not really as satisfying an answer as I want right now. I don't like to see crime, sin, injustice go unpunished. We want to see the rest of the story, don't we? I do. I think I've mentioned this before. One of my wife's favorite movies is The Emperor's New Groove. It's a good one. Don't ever watch it with her, though, because she knows everything and she will quote it the whole movie. It's kind of cute, actually. But anyway, one of her favorite movies. But I was thinking about this, and for some reason this movie popped into my head. Those of you that have seen it, and I would think most would. If you haven't, good movie, go watch it. Family night. But in the movie, it's full of injustices being made right, you know? If you know the story, there's a There's a prideful, arrogant, selfish prince who thinks he's all that, and he gets turned into a llama. And he deserves that, okay? And you like that. It's all right, that kid deserved that. That's good. And then eventually he gets his heart right, throughout the movie, and so you kind of feel bad for him. And so you want to be turned back to a llama, but there's another evil queen that turned him into the llama who eventually gets turned into a cat. I think that's how it goes, if I remember right. I haven't seen it in a while. And she deserved that in the end. And then the guy that was turned into a llama after he got his heart right, he got turned back into the prince, and he was a good king after that. And the whole world was right, and it felt really good. We like movies like that, right? Because we can see the whole story. We enjoy that. Almost in every good movie or good book that you might read, good story that you might hear, there's a time within the plot where the villain seems to be getting away with their treachery, right? Many times right up to the end of the story, it seems as if they're going to get off scot-free. And the entire time in your soul and in your mind as you're watching it, you're crying out for justice, right? Then it finally happens, and the good guys win, right prevails, the story ends, and we feel all nice and fuzzy again. And we can go to sleep happy. The truth is, though, we rarely see in real life the end of the stories like in movies and stories like that, do we? I'm not standing up here and telling you that that is easy to handle. Some of you, there are some personal things in life that you don't get. Some injustices that have been handed out to you that don't make sense and that you struggle with. I'm not making light of those, and I'm not saying that you should just brush those off and that's easy to handle. But what I am saying is that Solomon, and it's what Solomon is drawing attention to here, while injustice is going on now, God will one day serve true justice to every wicked deed done in this world and every righteous act committed. Everything in the world will one day be made right, but it's in God's time. But there's more to this here. It should drive us to something. There's an action that it should drive us to, this reality. After gazing at the just sovereignty of God for a moment, Solomon here in verse 18 through 20 looks back to the affairs of men. So he sees the injustice. He takes a moment, he takes a pause, he turns his gaze, he looks to God. He kind of comforts himself for a moment. He says, okay, God will serve justice in his time. And he looks back to the affairs of men. And he says this in verses 18 through 20, I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they all have one breath. So that a man hath no preeminence over a beast, for all is vanity. All go into one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. You could easily breeze right through this passage and just think, oh, here goes Solomon on one of his pessimistic rants again. Let me get through this here and try to find something worthwhile reading. But there is truth here that he wants us to grasp. And I believe that truth that he's pulling out here, that he's beating to a pulp right now, this idea is that we are not in control. He's talking about our inability to control these things, to control life. There are some that try to take these verses and use them for some type of proof text for evolution, and that's obviously false. That's missing the point of what Solomon is saying. Solomon here is simply saying that just as animals die, so do we. We have no control over that. We all, just as animals are born and come into this world and die, we do the same thing. He's alluding there to that there's a similarity of fragile nature to life, and we're not exempt from that. Then in verse 21, he cynically asks, who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? And with the hard facts before him and us, we can't prove a thing, can we? At best, it is a guess. If we are only to consider what we can see, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can hear, what we can smell, our senses, your guess is as good as mine based on that. Who knows, right? Sounds a lot like what? Agnosticism, right? Everyone has their own guess when left to their own finite brains. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. That's what the world today tells us. Fortunately here, though, in the closing verse of chapter 3, Solomon encourages us to enjoy life in spite of the injustices that we experience. The question here is, so who knows the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast descends downward to the earth? Who can know the truth about the resurrection? The answer is no one can, right? No one can under heaven, under the sun. Who knows? We don't know, but who does know? God knows, right? So the question then becomes, do you know the one who knows? Not only do you know him, but do you have a complete faith and trust that he not only knows, but he is in control of it? It's what we talked about in the last message, about his sovereignty, working everything out. So in his closing verse here in chapter 3, Solomon encourages us to enjoy life in spite of the injustice we find in this world. He says, "Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works. For that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him?" And this is a great verse here. The Hebrew word there for happy means happy. Simply that. It means what it sounds like. God wants us to be happy in the midst of this unjust life. And the word lot there is interesting. The word lot or portion conveys that sense of limitations of life. He's assuming that we have limitations. The portion is like an inherited plot of land that we might have to work on. Can I just pause here for a second? Solomon talks here, and he tells us to be happy with the lot, the portion that we have received in this life. Perhaps there are some in this room that, quite frankly, you're bitter at God. Or at the very least, you're unsatisfied with the lot, the portion that you have received in this life. Something like, I don't have the talents I think I deserve. I don't have the house I wish I could have. I don't have the looks I wish I was born with. I don't have the parents, the spouse, the kids I think I deserve in this life. I don't have the job or money I think I deserve. I don't have the health I justly deserve as a child of God. We have questions like that rise up. And perhaps we don't say them in those words, but that's at the back of our mind. In our hearts, we have that feeling. This is not fair, God. This is not just. Don't I deserve better than this? The harsh reality, yes, you may not have those things. That's not going to change necessarily. But rejoice and be happy in what you do have. Because the fact is, you only get the chance to live this life once. And then you die. That's what Solomon is saying. And then you will no longer have the opportunity to enjoy anything in this life again. We run through this life once, right? That's it. You have one shot, one chance. Make the most of it. I heard a story a few months back about a man named Nick Vujicic. It's a pretty fascinating story. It's about a man, he's a successful Christian evangelist and motivational speaker as well as an author. But there's something pretty unique about Nick. He has no arms and no legs. He's a torso, basically. When you look at him, it kind of takes your breath away for a second. When you look at him, it doesn't seem right. He has no arms and he has no legs. And I was watching a little clip of some of his story that he was talking about. He's an awesome guy. There's lots of videos online. Go check him out sometime. His name is Nick Vujicic. But he said this: there were times when I looked at my life and thought, I can't do this and I can't do that. And I keep concentrating on the things that I can't do, and I forget what I have. Just remember, this is a guy that has no arms and no legs. He doesn't have one arm. He doesn't have one leg. He has none. And he's saying this. He said, the first thing I've seen is to be thankful. Wow. He said, it's hard to be thankful. When I was 8, I kind of summed up my life and thought, I'm never going to get married, I'm never going to have a job, and I'm never going to have a life. But at the end of this little speech that he was giving, he said, I love life. And he meant it. He's one of the most joyful people I've ever actually witnessed. The first book he wrote was entitled Life Without Limits, Inspiration for a Ridiculously Good Life. Man, I'm not sure I could in good conscience write that. I'm not sure I'm living that. Whenever I think about Nick, my heart is rebuked. Nick is a man that took his lot, his portion in life, and said, I'm going to be happy with it. If anybody in life, right from the moment he was born, had the right to say, this is not fair, God. Pretty much everyone I look at has at least one arm and at least one leg. I got none. That's not fair. That wasn't what he said. He's honest. He says he feels that from time to time. He's felt that in the past, but his choice is, I'm going to be happy, and I'm going to live this life to the fullest with what God has given me. And he lives his life fuller than most of us in this room, myself included. It's amazing all the stuff that this guy does. He understands what Solomon's talking about here. Work hard. Do the best you can with a portion that you are given in life. Don't waste your time wishing, wondering, wanting justice in your life. As we learned last time, cast it to God, to the one that is sovereign, that is in control. So tell me, what is your injustice? What is your unjust hardship in life right now? And I do not mean to make light of it. That is not the point. Everyone in here, every person in this room has some injustice somewhere that you feel, that sometimes creeps up in your heart. Some of it is big. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you've experienced health problems that are just beating you down and you think this is not fair, God. The unjust nature of this life should drive us to a dependence on God, selfless joy. Yes, we are not in control and we cannot understand the seemingly unjust facts of life, but what we can do is recognize and come to grips with the reality of it, our frailty, our need for dependence on God, and to, like Nick, rejoice with the portion that we have received. So we've seen here the reality of injustice and how that reality should drive us to joyful, selfless dependence on God. Finally, we see what our response to direct oppression should be in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Here we see that oppression should drive us to compassion. Oppression should drive us to compassion. Solomon says, chapter 4, 1 through 3, So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are under the sun. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. Yea, better is he that than both they which have not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So Solomon here returns to ponder some things. Some things that he has seen, and he talks of the great oppression that he has seen in the world, the injustice, the oppression, the pain, the tears, the suffering. It becomes very, very dark, doesn't he? He's basically saying he's envying the dead. Why? Because they no longer have to feel the oppression. And he goes as far as to say, and those who have not yet been born, they're better off because they never had to experience the oppression. It's pretty dark. Solomon here is not advocating depression or suicide or abortion or anything like that. Many consider this passage to be a hyperbole or an exaggeration of a truth to get across a point. In other words here, Solomon is saying the only alternative to enjoyment of life as a gift from God's hand is the gloomy despair caused, in part at least, by reflection on unchecked oppression. You can enjoy life or you can dwell on the oppression of life. What do you want to do? And there is oppression in this world, is there not? A quick glance back through history reveals that there is oppression, a lot of it. The oppression of the Israelites in Egypt, the 150,000 persecuted during the Spanish Inquisition, the millions of Jews killed during the Holocaust, slavery in the not-too-distant past of our own country's history. There has been oppression in this world, and there is oppression right now. Millions. Each day hurt, experience poverty, hardships. What are you doing about it? I want you all here in closing to notice verse 1 again. It's a good point in here. He says, "So I returned and considered all the oppressions that were done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed." And here it is. "And they had no" what? "Comforter." And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but what? They had no comforter. It's a shame that those that speak the most of love, righteousness, and justice in this world are often the ones that are the least active. The most oppressed, persecuted man to ever live was who? It was Jesus Christ, right? And ironically, through his oppression, he made way for the great comforter to come, the greatest of comforters to come, the Holy Spirit. Think about that. We're talking about injustices here, right? The greatest injustice in all of history to ever happen, it was done on the behalf of you and me. Who are we to talk about injustice? Can I challenge you, encourage you as people who claim to have experienced the work of the great comforter in your life? You can have a testimony, a ministry, an influence, an impact in the world around you. How are the injustices, the oppressions of the world you see around you motivating you to be the hands and the feet of the greatest and only true comfort this world will ever know? But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are what? We are healed. Can I encourage you in a world of so many injustices not to forget the greatest and most important of them all, and to make it a point to be the comforter to someone in your life right now that needs it? Solomon cried out, "Where are the comforters?" There is none there. The great comforter has come, and he is now using you and I to fulfill his work here on this earth. Don't let the injustices of the world steal your joy and service for Christ. Get your eyes off yourself. Admit and come to terms with your lot in life and take what God has given you, just like Nick Vujicic did. Rejoice in what you have and look to comfort those in need around you. Would you bow your heads?